Hey guys, welcome back for another episode of The Suited Shootist. And what I want to talk about this week is a bit of a departure from kind of what I was chatting about last week. I'm still going to talk about TACCon, but I wanted to just kind of bring this in because I feel like it's just a little bit more useful and relevant at the moment. And just to kind of jump into it, what I'm going to be talking about today is the concept of social friction. It is a term that I first heard used by John Houtman over at Filster, and so he's going to be getting the credit for it. If it's coined by somebody else, my apologies, but he's where I heard it first, so he gets the shout out. Anyway, the idea being that aside from kind of the tactical side of the house, which is all the fun stuff. You know, it's the shooting, it's the preparing to repel danger and assault and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, let's be honest, even though in reality those are horrible things that none of us ever want to experience in actuality, the training's kind of fun. I mean, the camaraderie is great, as well as the fact that when you get it, yeah, you kind of feel like a bit of a badass. It would be silly to deny that aspect of it. But that's still not what I'm talking about. Setting aside the preparations for violence, social friction is exactly what it sounds like. It is any time just through the course of our day-to-day lives that there is an interaction that doesn't go smoothly. Sometimes they can be avoided, sometimes they can't. But it exists, and it's definitely something that should be incorporated into kind of the overall knowledge, skill set, abilities, and plan of the rest of our EDC package, as it were. This is why this matters, twofold. Number one, just from a convenience standpoint, the more you can minimize social friction, the less aggravation you've got to deal with in a given day. And especially with just kind of the societal temperatures being what they are, everybody's walking around just a little bit more prickly than they may have been in the past. So anything that you can do to minimize having to contend with any unnecessary bullshit is probably a good idea. The reason why this pertains to the integration of gear and wardrobe is because, again, especially with just kind of the societal developments that we've seen, both in terms of coronavirus as well as some of the more emotionally charged current events, there are people that are, number one, very willing and sometimes eager to insert themselves into a confrontation because they feel entitled on some level to be the referee, the arbiter of the social contract or what have you. And that can be problematic on a bunch of different fronts. From the concealment side, this is why it is, in my opinion, pretty critical that we put a little bit more care and attention into as truly covert a method of carry as is realistically possible. You know, everybody has just had that lazy moment of having to run to the store for, whatever. Whether it's, you're out of milk, the wife wants ice cream, take your pick. And so really you're just covering the gun to be polite, and you're not overly concerned with kind of getting made. However, I wrote an article a couple years back, and I'll probably include some of those examples in the description of how being less intentional about truly concealing that firearm can complicate things. Everything from being basically ejected from an event that their kid was attending to just all sorts of undesirable outcomes. Nobody went to the hospital, nobody went to jail, nobody lost their jobs, but it was still an outcome that honestly could have been avoided. So covert carry has a real ability to reduce that social friction, so that if you happen to cross paths with one of those people that's just kind of, jocked up and feels like, they're the enforcer of the rules that day, you just slide by their radar. You don't even ping, doesn't register to them, and you get to go about your day instead of having to deal with that idiot. And the other reason why I think that it's so critical to kind of have that understanding of social friction is because the possibility of it exists with every single social interaction you have. Every time you interact with another person in real life, you're buying another ticket in that lottery. And so it's the odds of large numbers. If you have enough interactions with enough people, eventually it's gonna happen. And so, number one, you can either just not interact with people, which, for some is an appealing prospect, not so much for others. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how to live your life, but if you are in that camp of, cool, I just want to buy a cabin in the mountains and be left alone and not have anybody bother me, rock on. Don't assume that that is the appropriate outcome for everybody, and don't project that as the solution to this. It's certainly a solution, but it's not going to work for everybody. Especially if you're, kind of the metropolitan dweller like myself. I interact with a lot of people regularly. Most of the time I don't really mind it, but I need to be savvy enough to navigate those circumstances to reduce that social friction. It's beneficial to me professionally because I'm in commission sales, and it's also beneficial to me from the standpoint of being a concealed carrier, because it can help, like I said, some nosy social referee from calling the cops on me unnecessarily. It can also help reduce the chances of me getting on the news or getting internet famous, because we've seen those videos of basically what started as just a trivial social disagreement and then escalated to some level of force and sometimes some level of violence. That's not a win in my book. Once you've gotten to that point, it's damage control. So if you're attentive to the possibilities and, if you'll forgive the term, the triggers of social friction, then you can be more in tune and more adept to avoiding them or helping to kind of quell them should they arise. Because this was something that Larry Lindemann mentioned at his weapons retention block at TACCON. Every interaction that you get in is a potential gunfight because you brought the gun. And so, yeah, I mean, we've all seen the silly shit of somebody getting shot over a parking spot, or some other trivial perceived slight. But that's the extreme example. I want to bring it back to the lottery ticket metaphor, because you got to bear that in mind, especially for the ones who are a bit more flippant and cavalier about their concealment. This is something that I'm probably going to be digging into a little bit deeper and sharing a few more stories on in the future, because we've all heard the kind of the dismissals of, oh, well, most people have their heads buried in their phones, so they're not paying attention, they don't care, yada, yada, yada. Two things. Number one, while that might be correct, and honestly, it's not more than it is, the ones that ain't paying attention ain't the reason that I'm carrying a gun. Secondarily, just because somebody has not experienced a negative outcome yet doesn't necessarily mean that the behavior or the tactic or the procedure that they're recommending is advisable. Just means they ain't gotten bitten in the ass yet. I call it the Tiger Rock fallacy. I'm sure there's a more official name for it, but there was an episode of The Simpsons where Lisa was basically explaining to Homer, it's like, no, Dad, that's a ridiculous argument. That's like saying this rock keeps away tigers, because if you look around, you don't see any tigers. And, of course, the punchline was Homer offering to buy the rock off of her, but that's exactly it. The people saying, oh, well, my half-assed level of concealment is fine because I haven't had the cops called on me or nobody's called me out on it yet, it's the Tiger Rock argument, because you're carrying a gun. Somebody who is averse to firearms may not have the balls to confront you directly because they know you're armed. They might be much more eager to call somebody else with a gun to come deal with you. In a less extreme example, whether it be a professional or a social setting, just because they ain't saying something to you doesn't necessarily mean that they ain't saying something to somebody else. And again, it depends on the circles that you're running in. There are folks who only exist in kind of the social pools where carrying a firearm is perfectly acceptable. It's normal. Worst case, it might be kind of a quaint novelty. There are other people who are the only one in their kind of little world that routinely carries a firearm for defensive purposes. And so we just need to be cognizant of the fact that it bridges that entire spectrum. So when it comes to the social friction, number one, be attentive to it, because it's out there and it can bite you. Be equipped to avoid it or kind of help to mitigate it if you feel it kind of to start creeping in. Secondarily, take steps to ensure that it's a lower risk by being more intentional with your concealment. I honestly think that the concealed versus covert language that Mike Green used, I've heard Mike Pannone talk about it as well, probably warrants its own video as well. And so it's something that I'll probably dig into a little bit deeper on that. I just wanted to kind of put this on everybody's radar, because hopefully you've managed to get up to this point in your life without experiencing any negative outcomes. I hope that continues. And I just want to put out some considerations for you to factor in to ensure that that continues to be the case, not just because you got lucky, but because you've taken the intentional steps to ensure that's the case. So let me know what your thoughts are on this one, because it's a little bit more nebulous of a subject, and I think I'm just kind of scratching the surface with it. I'd love to hear your comments down below in terms of if you've encountered this before, maybe what you did to address it, or what steps you're taking to be proactive and reduce the chance of it happening to you. Let me know what you think. Also, I've been a little bit remiss on this, but please, by all means, like the video, subscribe to the channel on YouTube if you haven't already. That definitely helps me out. I'm almost out of Facebook jail at this point, so it does help me out quite a bit if you share these videos around, if either sharing them from YouTube onto Facebook or sharing it around on Instagram, either way. And if there's something on this that you feel like I missed, let me know down in the comments as well. So I hope everybody has a great week. Stay safe and stay sharp.